This brings us to the main aspect of this evening's proceedings at the Floor Oistins Fish Festival opening ceremony. We are going to have our feature address, and it's indeed an honor for me to introduce this evening's speaker. Please welcome the Honorable Mia Amor Motley, QC, leader of the Barbados Labour Party. Thank you.
Good afternoon to each and every one of you. Good afternoon to each and every one of you. That's better. Minister of Health, the Honorable John Boyce, Canon Austin Carrington, Stella Lady St. John, Senators Jerome Walcott and Wilfred Abrams, members of Parliament whom I have not seen, and members who intend to be members of Parliament who I see. Ladies and gentlemen, I am particularly humbled to be at Oistins this evening. For the youngsters who don't know, I first came here in 1978, as a young first former who had just entered secondary school. I suspect my parents do not recall the battle I had with them to be able to catch the bypass bus, to be able to come to Oistins on my own on that day. But I recall it because, as with many other things as a child, when you were seeking to do something that they didn't necessarily approve and that you wanted fervently, you fought with passion. And coming to the Oistins Fish Festival for me in 1978 was one of those such occasions. For me, Easter has been synonymous with Oistins. And it is for this reason that I am particularly pleased to be part of this ceremony this evening. But I asked myself as I came here to speak and among all of the contending noises and influences and interests and people that gather this afternoon, this Saturday afternoon, what are we really coming here to do? And why are we here? What is today and what is this place? And as with everything else, I learned from a very young age you do not compete with empty noises. From a very young age, I was conscious and made aware that this ground, this town, was hallowed territory for this country. And to what do I refer? Those of you who are visiting from North America, in particular the United States of America, may not have a clue as to the extent to which on a rainy day such as this, 3 days of rain back in January 1652, that there happened an event in this town that came to influence global polity and democracy in the Western Hemisphere. And I refer specifically to the Charter of Barbados signed on the 17th of January 1652, a charter that, among the many things that it set out to do, laid claim to the simple precept that no taxes, customs, imposts, loans, or excise shall be laid nor levy made on any of the inhabitants of this island without their consent in a general assembly. Now, we who live here know that it left out and omitted the very real fact that the majority of inhabitants would not have the capacity to be represented in that assembly because it did not recognize that slaves were human beings. But what it did to the development and evolution of history and constitutional development the world over was to lay claim to the simple precept 125 years almost earlier than the Declaration of Independence in the United States of America and the events that led to the Boston Tea Party, where barrels and boxes of tea were thrown overboard because of the objection of the merchants in New England to the taxes being imposed by the British Parliament. That precept adopted here at the Mermaid Tavern in Oistins would become the precept that led to the Declaration of Independence in the United States of America in 1776. Ours was 1652, 125 years before. And while other elements of our democracy, as evinced in the Magna Carta, which was the subject of action in the United Kingdom, this little island played its own part in what would become parcel of the human rights that we have seen evolve over the course of the centuries. But for many of you, March 31st does not have the same meaning that it has for myself and a few others sitting in this crowd. And you will forgive me if I pause today as well to reflect that the confluence of being at this space, at this time, speaks many things to me. And what do I refer to? 80 years ago, on this coast, a couple of miles from here, a few men, and I would like to refer to them as a few good men. In those days, it was 6 years before women would be allowed the right to vote, and therefore there were no women in the meeting. But 80 years ago on this afternoon, a group of men met at Martineau, what is now Martineau House on Bay Street, to form the Barbados Progressive League, which would eventually become to be known as the Barbados Labour Party. So that I speak to you today on the 80th birthday of the institution that I have the honor to lead in this country, the oldest political party in the English-speaking Caribbean. And while this afternoon is not the place nor time for me to speak to those things that come from that celebration of the 80th birthday of this political party, suffice it to say that it is important to recognize this fact at this space, in this time, at Oistins. And as I do so, it caused me to reflect on all who come and gather here, because as Lady St. John said to us earlier, now, especially in the context of an Easter weekend, is the context at which we look at rebirth and reawakening. And we believe that the time has come for us to reflect and review what we have here that is special in terms of this town, and how we can make it even better and more special for each and every one of you who have to ply this tongue of Oistins as we go forward. We make the assumption that it is only the people of Christ Church who come to Oistins. That is not a true assumption. The reality is that we have persons from all over who find that it is convenient and pleasant to do their business here. We have the legacy that has been left to us from our great leader, Sir Harold Bernard St. John, who along with Lady St. John and the Hilltop Group ensured that we could gather on this weekend to celebrate the work and the output of the people of Oistins and the fisher folk of Oistins. But where do we carry it from here? What was it that Grantley Adams before Sir Harold's time came and found, and what did he do about it? What was it that Sir Harold himself came and found, and what did he do about it? What about the others? Senator Walker and even Minister Boyce. What are the things that have made that tangible difference to the quality of life? I had the good fortune of working with the fisher folk of Barbados for over the course of 2 years as we prepared for the Maritime Delimitation Agreement more than a decade ago. And it gave me a sensitivity to their condition, to their aspirations, and there are some friends who I would like to call family today, with whom I became involved as a result of that encounter in understanding what and how fishing developed in this country. In the 1950s, there was no doubt that many a Barbadian family relied on the fishing industry in order to be able to sustain their families and their livelihoods. But it was in the context of understanding that the sailboats would no longer carry these men to be competitive or to be able to do that which was necessary to sustain their families and the fishing industry that led to Grantley Adams creating the framework that allowed the majority of the fishing industry to start the transformation from sail to engine. It was in the recognition that day boats could no longer sustain the industry and be competitive against our neighbors to the south that led Sir Harold St. John to become involved in the context of converting those day boats to ice boats and to longliners to allow men like Rogie and others to be able to stay out to sea for weeks at a time, days at a time, rather than having to come back to shore and therefore be limited to only certain categories of fish within the context of this market. And we have today to ask ourselves, how do we compete against the multinational corporations and the nations of the world who now ply our waters, sometimes with impunity, in the southern and eastern Caribbean? And how do we ensure that we make it possible for our fishermen and for their children who ought to be coming in to the fishing industry to be able to learn, yes, ladies and John, but also to afford to own fishing boats in this country again? We have come to recognize that the making available of the capital, as was done by Grantley Adams, as was done by Sir Harold St. John through the then Barbados Development Bank and other institutions, is absolutely critical if we are going to get young Barbadians involved in the fishing industry again. We have on average over 2,500 people who make their living in this country either as fishermen or vendors or working in the markets. And that 2,500 people means that you probably have about 12 to 15,000 people who depend daily on the fate and well-being of the fishing industry in order to live and eat in their households in this country. It is against this background that I believe very strongly that the government of Barbados has a duty, a solemn duty, to be able to facilitate access to capital for those Barbadian youngsters and families who believe, whether through individual effort or cooperative effort through co-ops and companies, that theirs is to be a future on the seas again in this country, plying the oceans of the Caribbean and sustaining our people, not by overfishing, but by employing with our conservators the best precepts of fishing, but at the same time ensuring that we can continue to earn not only locally, but foreign exchange through the export of fish to the rest of the world. We also believe that the time has come for us to make available to the vendors access to capital through things that we will call trust loans, to be able to ensure that they too can up their game and they too can provide in the best possible displays their product, their fish, so that persons can begin to see what is immediately available as they walk through the market. And that for those who are interested in moving to the next level, that they can sustain their supply in spite of the periodic supply and of fish being available that is seasonal. If we don't help our people, who pray will help them? And that's a simple, simple, simple message that the people of Oistins must walk away with. I thank, in the same way that we thank Sir Harold and Sir Grantley for the transformation of the fishing industry, We thank Sir Harold for his vision with the construction of this fishing market. But this fish market, built more than 30 years ago, is no longer appropriate to the needs of a modern Barbados on the cusp of the third decade of the 21st century. Nor is the one in Bridgetown, nor is the Bridgetown Fishing Harbor capable of meeting the needs of the many boats looking for berthing facilities. And we are waiting for a disaster to happen if we don't treat it as a priority. The notion that we cannot export fish to Europe, but other countries with less resources and less capacity in this Southern Caribbean can do so, is something that offends the spirit of pride in each of us who know the circumstances of why we cannot do it. It is too simple an issue to resolve. And the issue relates to making sure that the best phytosanitary conditions exist in this market. It is something that is easily understood by all. If you have tiles with grout in between, bacteria will stay in the grout. Simple. If you have a surface that is smooth and that can be wiped off and kept clean and sanitized, then you don't have the same risk with respect to bacteria in the fish. If we know that, then why do we continue to limit the opportunities of the vendors and the fisher folk in this country by failing to undertake the most basic of reforms, which is to rehabilitate the counters and the areas within which fish are kept in our markets? It is too simple and too easy. Similarly, if we have the opportunity to provide the training and also to do the legislation and to get the labs done, we have seen labs built. And I believe the Minister of Health is here and the former Minister of Health is here who would have helped start those talks. We have seen other labs built in this country, recently opened. But why is it that we cannot do what is necessary to get the phytosanitary conditions done? It is too simple a matter, and for us to move forward, Barbados must commit to making things right within our fishing industry so that we can create new opportunities for them and their families. But it is not only in the fishing industry. The truth is, I said to you that I came to learn and to meet many of the fisher folk, the good fisher folk of this country, through the work that I did with the maritime delimitations when I was Attorney General. And it was then that I realized that we are very lucky people, because we believe that we should run the affairs of our country and to support the well-being of 275,000 people on the basis of the economic activity of the land alone, when in truth and in fact, the land represents almost 1,000th of what we have jurisdiction over as a state and as a people. How do we ignore the bounty of the ocean? How do we ignore the economic opportunities of the ocean? How do we ignore the risk to our stability that the ocean presents? How do we ignore the risk to our stability coastally and in terms of our communities that the ocean represents without being foolhardy? It is against this background that in preparing for today's address and in reflecting on how the moment and the place have conspired to create that special time in history, that I determined that we have to confront our reality with destiny. That no future government of Barbados can exist without a dedicated capacity to address the oceans of this country. That no future government of Barbados can exist without us being able to understand that there shall be a Ministry of Maritime Affairs and Blue Economy, that people must come to work every day to see how we can expand the opportunities for our people to earn from the ocean, how we can protect our people from the ocean, how we can protect our coral reefs, which ironically, we are in the International Year of Coral Reefs as we speak, and the absence of the coral reefs have led to all kinds of absence of fishing stock from our coastal waters that hitherto all the Barbadians have taken for granted. So today, as we speak, I give you the assurance that this country must move forward, making use of all of its advantages and protecting itself against all of its risk. And the ocean is the most visible one. When I say to you that every child under the age of 18 should be able to swim by 2030, it is because no person living on an island should ever feel that they cannot confront what that ocean presents, and that if we can stop all people from drowning, then it is a noble objective that we should stop all people from drowning. If I say to you that we should have an opportunity to be able to help fund by placing a bond in place for fishermen to be able to access modern fishing fleets with modern technology, using elements of renewable energy so that they can meet the competition of Trinidad, where boats access fuel at 1/4 of the price that Barbadian boats have to access fuel on. It is because we are ready to make this happen. And the only way, my friends, that I know to make it happen is that somebody must come to work every day, charged with the responsibility of making these changes to the maritime economy and maritime affairs of this country. And ladies and gentlemen, your hopes for a fishing academy have not gone on deaf ears. But may I say to you that it is not simply about a fishing academy. It is about a maritime academy. It is about returning the country, because when we moved from sail to engine in the 1950s, our children lost the art of sail making. They must learn to make sails again in a modern Barbados economy. They must learn about rigging again. They must learn to service a yachting industry. They must learn to allow us to benefit from the geographic and climatic advantages that are unique to Barbados. I used to have a teacher in primary school, same time I was coming here at Oistins. She was a geography teacher from Tobago, and her name was Flora Jordan. I suspect some of you knew her. She was about 6 foot tall and towering. And she spoke in these tones: girls, girls, Barbados is not in the Caribbean Sea. She sounded like British, but she was Tobagonian. Barbados is in the Atlantic Ocean. That is why we don't get hit by hurricanes. And I didn't quite understand what she was telling us then, until many, 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 many years later. And we failed to understand that when we lost the Atlantic yachting race and we allowed other countries in the region to develop serious yachting facilities, that we failed to optimize the unique geographic and climatic advantage that Barbados has, and that in a world where climate change is causing such havoc, will continue to have, in spite of even our evolving circumstances. So what does this mean? That very often in the context of the hurricane season, we should have facilities in this country not necessarily owned by government, because government cannot be all things to all people, but facilitated by government, to be able to allow safe harbor for hundreds and hundreds of ships and yachts who may find it perilous to remain within the corridor of the Eastern Caribbean in the context of a looming hurricane. We must, however, have young people and older people to support the needs of that yachting community, not simply by the passage of fiscal incentives or the shopping of incentives, but by the building of skills through a maritime division within the Polytechnic and the Barbados Community College, systematically setting out to train our people in conjunction with the International Maritime Organization. Similarly, with respect to being seafarers, how many Barbadian families only exist today because their fathers or grandfathers or great-grandfathers went to sea and were able to send back the money so that their mother and grandfather could support them to allow them to become big men and women today. I say to you at Oistins this evening that we stand at a critical juncture of our nation's history. And it is up to us to make that defining difference. I appreciate Minister Boyce's comments with respect to the sewage system, but now is not the time nor place for me to address that on this festive occasion. Suffice it to say that the protection of public health and law and order shall always be a priority of all governments in this country that want to care about people. But what I will address is that the infrastructure of our towns has to be dealt with. And part and parcel of the problem that we face comes back down to a governance issue. That somebody must come to work every day to make sure that these towns are functioning. Whether it is Oistins or Bridgetown or Speightstown, whether it is Six Roads or the Glebe, whole town, that we now need in Barbados the concept of a town manager, of a municipal manager. Not necessarily the old trappings of local government, but a manager with a small staff and the appropriate budget working alongside. New forms of participation for our people to participate across the country, to have a say in what is a priority and how they work alongside these town managers and members of parliament and line ministries. If they did that, then they would know, as happened earlier this week, that when the rain falls, what happens up here in the Bay Garden? If the rain falls in certain parts of Bridgetown, what happens there? If you had somebody coming to work every day, they would be able to ensure that the organizers of this committee didn't have to move 10 loads of garbage from this spot, as they have to do almost every year. Because what we then have is functional spaces that work for people, that are clean, that make a difference in people's lives. And I hope and pray that we can have the opportunity to make sure that how we relate to one another in these towns starts to change. So my friends, today I welcome this chance to share a few thoughts with you. I could go on and tell you that we will, as we will, if ever given a chance, make sure that the boardwalk on the south coast comes right up to Oistins, as Senator Walcott and others intended that it should always be when they developed the Oistins Bay Garden. And life is a continuum, because there will be things that we will not finish even now, or they will not finish even now. But what must be constant is our values and our commitment to make a difference in people's lives in this country. And we can only make a difference in people's lives if what matters in that market, or what happens in that market matters, or what happens in the Bay Garden matters, or what happens across the road at the commercial center matters, or for the people who are splashed up when they walk in the street because the drainage in Oistins Town is not what it should be. Those things matter. And I believe that if we can help grow the pie by growing the basis and sources of growth for our economy, by utilizing the ocean, by utilizing our people in new ways, in new things to service others who want to come to our part of the world, by making sure that we never ignore the basics, our people and their surroundings, their environment, and by ensuring that people have a voice at all times, a voice in what happens in their circumstances, and that there's somebody to follow through on it, then those who come after us, I pray, will find that this country and this place will be a better place. And for those who wonder how this has mushroomed into one of the top tourist attractions, it is because Bajans are friendly. It is because Bajans are homely. It is because Bajans know how to share what we have. But I want to suggest to you, and I look at John as I say so, as a former manager of a band, that if we were to provide entertainment 4 days a week, or 3 days, or 5 days a week here, the trade of the persons who work in Oistins would even mushroom much further, because people would have an opportunity, as well as our entertainers of different disciplines, not just Kaiso, not just dub, but of different disciplines, would have an opportunity for their talents to be heard. We create audiences, we create employment, and we engender the competitiveness of the vendors who are going to be feeding people. These are just some of the ideas that have come, many from you. The difference is, are we determined to deliver? And I say, with your help, that we shall always be. Let us treat to this Easter weekend as a rebirth. Let us treat to this Easter weekend as a renewal. Because as we reflect on our religion canon, that is what it is. But at the same time, as we reflect on the faith of our nation, that is what is required. I say, we can't do it alone, but I know we can do this together. And the people of Oistins and the people of Christchurch and the people of Barbados are dependent on us to make that decisive difference, so that when we come here 10 years from now, 20 years from now, to celebrate this glorious festival, those looking back can say equally with pride that the process of growth and renewal has continued apace, and upon their shoulders lies the mantle to continue that process of growth and renewal. Thank you to the organizers of the festival, Herbie and Dan, and the many other workers who work selflessly. But thank you to the police, and thank you to the public health inspectors, and to all of the other people that we take for granted, because this thing cannot happen by accident or by serendipity. And for those who wonder how you can do things without a lot of money, and who ask where you're going to get the money from, we have in the example of Dan Carter and Herbie Yearwood how a festival that engenders millions of dollars in economic activity in one weekend being put on without the kind of money being provided for it from the taxpayers, but yet the opportunities for economic activity continue to abound in this nation. It is an example that all of us would do well to follow as we go forward in this nation. Have a blessed and happy Easter, and I look forward to spending a little more time mixing with you in this most overcast but still wonderful and cool environment. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you very much to the Honorable Mia Motley, QC, for delivering our feature address. By all accounts, very well received and very well done, ma'am. Thank you.